Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast. Our primary objective is to motivate and inspire our listeners to never quit. The reality of life is simple. We all fall. We all fail. At times, we get knocked down. The question is, do we get back up? Are we stronger? Are we better prepared to attain the maximum of our potential? Thank you for joining our No Quit tribe. As you go for your greatness today, never quit. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. Welcome to episode number 270 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is Iron Sharpens Iron. Our quote of the day comes to us from King Solomon. As iron sharpens iron, so a friend sharpens a friend. It is my complete honor to bring you today's episode. I was initially introduced to our guest after I read one of his books a few years ago. We ultimately connected on social media, and I'm extremely fortunate to now call Jimmy Page a friend. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Jimmy, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Man, it's good to be here, buddy. Wouldn't want to be anywhere else. Let's go.
Awesome. I appreciate it. So the first question I ask everybody is, are you ready to positively impact at least one person today?
Well, it's kind of my life mission, is to inspire and activate the greatness in others. So I have that focus from the very beginning. Let's go. Let's do it.
Awesome. We are going. So the number one objective of our show is to motivate and inspire listeners to never give up. And I was curious if you yourself have a no-quit story or perhaps a really challenging time where you could have given up or given in, but you didn't.
Can I tell a story about one of my sons?
Of course you can.
Yeah. So one of my sons, all my kids converted over from baseball to lacrosse. So we spent about the last 25 years in Maryland. And I was a baseball guy. So I was coaching my kids in baseball, and we converted them over to lacrosse, and they did that kicking and screaming. They were not that excited about moving over to a different game. They were pretty good in baseball. And when we did it, after the first year, they loved it. And a couple years in, they had started to get really good at the game. And my second son, Jake, had a desire to play for this travel team, kind of an elite travel team. And he tries out for the team. The coach invites him out. He makes the team. I think he was literally the last kid picked for this team. So he knew he had this uphill battle. And as the practice season started, he was having a big challenge. These guys were a bit above him, a bit ahead of him in the game. And he was getting super frustrated to the point where he didn't want to go play lacrosse anymore. And I'll never forget it. We had a conversation on the way home in the car, which is oftentimes it can kind of be the best and the worst of opportunities probably for a lot of our kids in sports, But I just asked him, I'm like, Jake, what's going on? Are you disappointed? He goes, Dad, I hate lacrosse, which was a new development, and I never want to play this game again. And I said, well, let me ask you a question. What are you going to do about it? Here we are. We're 7 or 8 practices in. You can drop down to the lower league and you'll have a lot of success there, and you can develop as a player, or you can see this as a challenge, and you can, this is a team you wanted to play for. So what do you want to do? And he decided in that moment, he's like, listen, I'm going to stick it out. And I said, look, Jake, one condition. If you stick it out, you got to be the kid that's running out all the ground balls, that's the best teammate on the sideline, that's encouraging others, and that's giving everything you got, because you haven't been doing that. Be the best teammate you can be. He goes out the next day, says, Dad, I can do that. He goes out, and over the course of the next several weeks, he got very little playing time. It would have been easy to be frustrated by that and give up, but instead, he became the absolute best influence on this team. He served right where he was. He gave maximum effort. He didn't quit. And because of that, we point back to that moment at the end of the season. The coach pulls the team in for awards and all that stuff. And I knew my son wasn't going to get any awards this year, but he said that he brought Jake up and he said, hey, I want everybody to take a look at Jake. Jake had in some ways a frustrating season, but I wish that every kid would respond to adversity and challenges the way this young man did. The effort that he put in, the heart that he put in, sacrificing himself for the team. If everyone on this team had a little bit more of that inside of them, we would have been a great team. And man, it was one of those moments you just say, hey, you never quit, you double down, and you stick it out.
That's an awesome story, and I think it has many learning points and many lessons that we all probably can teach. And I think as a parent myself, I have 3 young kids, and I think I've heard a lot of other parents when they kind of say to the kids, if you start a sport, you can't quit in the middle of a season. And I think it teaches a lot of skills. And I think the reality is, obviously, it goes hand in hand with our whole mission and message here at No Quit Living. But I think the even best part of the story, I think, not that he didn't quit, but I think the best part is he had a positive impact, not from on the field. And obviously there's not a single kid that ever starts a sport at a young age and says, you know what, Dad or Mom, I really don't want to play, and tryouts are tomorrow, and I hope I'm the last guy or girl on the bench and I never get off and I really want to lead from the sideline. It's the opposite. Everybody obviously wants to be on the field, on the court, on the rink, and playing. But I think it shows the power of positive energy and leading by example in different ways. And I'm really glad that you shared that story. Want to just ask, if you wouldn't mind, just telling our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do today.
Well, again, my name is Jimmy Page, and I work for the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. I'm one of their, I'm the Western Division VP, which means I oversee kind of everything from Colorado to Montana and Texas West. And at the same time, I have an opportunity to write books, write a lot of positive books, write some books that grow you spiritually, mentally, physically, emotionally. I do a bunch of speaking, a lot of keynotes and workshops around the country for companies as well. So I'm working in both the athletic world as well as the corporate world, which is just a lot of fun.
That's something that I'm fortunate to play in as well, and I think it's a really interesting arena to play in. And I think something that you probably can attest to is there are so many similarities between business, real life, family relationships, and also sports. And I think it obviously it goes hand in hand with winning and losing and profit loss, but also the teams and the companies and the organizations that really grow and continue to be productive, be successful. And I think a lot of people are finding that too in regards to hiring coaches and speakers and trainers, both in the sports world as well as the business world. So I appreciate you sharing that. Interesting question we ask everybody is, if you had to define yourself, but you could only use one word, what word would you choose?
So you're pulling the one word thing on me, man?
I am. And to our listeners who maybe don't know the backstory, I'm going to have you answer the question first, and then we'll go backwards.
Okay. Well, I think for me, the word that defines me is kind of my life word, and my life word is inspire. And I think it goes in both directions, right? I'd like to be inspired. I'm always inspired by those stories of the underdogs, and when people overcome great adversity, when they're able to face challenges and obstacles and overcome. So I'm always inspired by those stories. And at the same time, I want to live my life in such a way that inspires others. So if I were to put that kind of the title on the story, that one word, I'd say inspire. So
why don't we back up now? Obviously, that was a loaded question, but why don't you kind of give your story on the one word and kind of why it's ironic that not only am I asking this to you now, but because of the fact that obviously there's you have a tie to it.
Yeah. Well, a little over 20 years ago, believe it or not, I was, my best friend, Dan Britton, and I were kind of journeying through life. Feel like it's real important to have a group of friends around you, really solid friends that are moving in the same direction with the same values, with a higher purpose. And Dan and I were doing life together, and we were doing the New Year's resolution deal, not having a lot of success with that. And one day we were sitting around, he said, Jimmy, what's your word for the year? And I said, what do you mean? What are you talking about? And we started discussing this concept of throwing out the New Year's resolutions, narrowing the focus down to one single word for the year, and then watching how, in our case, as men of faith, how God would use that word to transform us in particular ways in all dimensions of life: mental, physical, emotional, relational. And then after journeying with this for about 10 years or so, we got connected with John Gordon, a mutual friend of ours. And John just loved the concept of one word. And we said, hey, would you write the book with us? Because he started using it at his keynotes and workshops and having a blast with it. And he finally said, yeah, let's do it. So we ended up writing the book. And this is, that's a copy of the book, a little self-promo. Sorry about that. Had to do it.
We're just audio, by the way. So we're on video now, but no one will see it. So unfortunately, they can't see you holding it up.
Man, that's so disappointing now. So I don't have to smile quite as big either. Oh, doggone it. But yeah, so we wrote the book, and it's a very simple process of just, picking one word for the year, very much like you just asked me if there was one word. But for us, it's an annual thing. It's all about life change. It's about becoming the person that you're made to be, becoming the best version of you in all dimensions so that you can have the greatest positive impact on others. So, I've been doing this 21 years. I've had a lot of words over the years that have formed chapters in my life and that have really made a difference in helping to refine my character, refine my mindset, and develop habits that really work for me.
No, I appreciate you sharing that, and I think it's an interesting perspective of how it came about, and it's obviously a really cool question that I like to ask because sometimes it frames the theme of the day for our show, but also it's always interesting to get that perspective from the guest because sometimes it tells a little bit about where they are maybe in their life or their career, and I enjoy that. And we try to ask these questions that have no yes no answers, so they're open-ended questions, and that's just an interesting question. So one of the things that following up and obviously being an author yourself, and I'm curious if you're reading anything currently or perhaps you've read something recently that you'd like to recommend to our listeners.
Man, one of the books, well, there are two books that I'm reading right now that are incredibly impactful, I think. The first one's called Mind Gym. And Mind Gym is written by a sports psychologist. His name's escaping me at the moment, but he wrote this book. It's an absolutely phenomenal read. It has principles and practices which help you to change your mindset because we know, and much of it, of course, is from an athletic perspective because he's a sports psychologist. But every single principle, every single exercise that he tells you that I've implemented, which there's about, I think, probably 40 in the book, and I've done every single one of these practices. I've kind of created my own mind gym out of it, has helped to transform the way I think, which then in turn, of course, changes what you do and the outcomes that you get. So Mind Gym is one of those books that's just super, super effective for that. And the other book that I'm reading right now is Secrets of the Vine. And it's more of a way to, it's a spiritual book that helps you to understand when you feel like change is on you, that you're almost a sense of being disciplined of sorts. Discipline never feels really good in the moment. But in the end, when you surface from it, if you let it do what it's supposed to do, it brings that transformation from the inside out and helps you to be a different kind of leader, a different kind of person.
I have not heard of that book, but I have read Mind Gym. It's a fantastic book, so I appreciate you sharing that. And one of the things we often have dissected the last probably year and a half now on our show is the morning routine. And I was curious if you yourself have a morning or a daily routine that you swear by.
I do. In fact, I post a lot about this, and that's one of the things I love about No Quit Living is you guys post so much practical stuff. One of the things that I spend a lot of time on in all the leadership training that I do is win the morning, win the day. If you can win the morning, you set your mind, your heart, and your body in the right direction. You're far more productive and far more impactful. So here's what I do. So first thing when I get up, I drink two things. I drink coffee because you should drink coffee. And then secondly, I drink athletic greens because I get an immediate boost to my immune system. I saw it recommended by just hundreds and hundreds of athletes. And then I started seeing it recommended by corporate executives. And I thought, man, there must be something to this. I've been taking that every single morning for over 3 years now. And I can tell you my immune system, my internal health, my gut health, my mental focus has probably never been better. So I attribute a lot of that to that piece. And then what I'll do is I'll typically listen to a podcast or I'll read some from my book. I invest in myself mentally. I'll read from one of the books that we discussed. Usually we'll pick up the Bible, read a Bible passage or two to set my mind, my heart, my spirit in the right direction. To really have an others focus. It's so easy to lose sight of the fact that we're really here to impact other people. And then I almost always list a handful of morning declarations. These are things that are true, that I know to be true about God, myself, my relationships. And then and I almost always give thanks for people in my life, and then contemplate, who can I bless today? Who's somebody that needs me to make a difference for them? I didn't mention working out. I also get at least a 30-minute workout on the bike, lifting some weights, and typically in a typical day, I'll work out a couple different times, but I always start the day there as well.
That's awesome, and I think the second to last thing you said is who can I serve to, who can I add value to, and I think it's something that epitomizes where we are during this pandemic, something that not only is super important now, but the reality is it's important all the time. We can always help people and we can always talk about that. But I want to just touch on one thing you said in the beginning is win the morning, win the day. I think that's such a powerful concept and idea, and I think so many people miss the boat on that. And the reason I asked this question about someone having a morning routine or a daily routine that they swear by is selfishly, I want to provide different things for our listeners to think about. Individually myself, I always get a bunch of recommendations, a bunch of ideas, and a lot of the guests that we've been incredibly fortunate to have shared similar ideas, similar concepts. But the reality is, just like the question I asked about, one word, there is no answer for everybody. There's no perfect routine. Sure. But when you win the morning, you have such a higher chance of going throughout that day on your terms. And I think it's really important that you touched on that. And I'm really glad that you shared that. So one of the words that we often touch on and just dissect is the word accountability. And I'm curious what the word accountability means to you, or personally, how do you define accountability?
Well, accountability has been a really important part of my life. I mean, I think I've got some internal accountability. I've got some vertical accountability in my relationship with God, obviously, for me as a man of faith. But I also have some horizontal accountability, which is where I've got some friends that are iron sharpening iron, guys that are not afraid to share the truth and not afraid to hold the mirror up and let you see yourself in a little different way, right? They call you out on the things that the commitments that maybe you're falling short on. They might challenge you to live more on purpose. They might challenge some selfish motives or attitudes that you maybe some negative attitudes that you might have. So accountability is I make certain commitments. I give other people, key people in my life, permission to ask me about those things and hold me to it. And then when I'm faced with that challenge, I'm obligated to do something about it. So for me, accountability is kind of full circle, right? I make a commitment, I give you permission, and then I'm challenged to do something about it if you bring it up.
No, I love that. And I guess a follow-up question to that is, do you have personal accountability partners in your life?
I do. I saw one of your recent posts that I think of one of the Skype calls you posted about or something. And man, I was like, dude, that guy's got iron sharpening. I think you've posted iron sharpens iron.
It's not only did I post it, that was one of in my story I put it too, is the hashtag. And that's a bunch of guys that I have two groups, one on Tuesday night and one on Thursday night. And I also have two other individual accountability partners that we talk every Wednesday morning. And I wanted to get your perspective because I think you are very similar in that way.
Yeah, very much so. I've had three particular guys that I've had accountability with since I was 22 years old. And we're all over the US now, Atlanta to Kansas City to here, we're all over the place, but we still connect frequently and hold each other accountable. But I think there's a component of accountability for me that is not often talked about. A lot of times it feels like people are constantly kind of exposing things that they've messed up on. And, oh man, here's how I blew it this week and I want to get better. But I think there's a piece of accountability that's really related to vision. It's like I make a commitment to a vision for my life. I share it with those inner circle of friends. And then they're like, hey, how are you doing with that vision you have for your marriage? I mean, are you progressing in intimacy in your marriage? How are you doing with respect to you as a dad? And I love that because it's forward focused. It's all about focusing on your purpose and on the progress that you're making. So the guys that I'm with are all about pushing towards that bigger purpose and bigger impact. But yeah, I've got those groups, and I also have someone who's a couple seasons older than me, who I would consider more of a mentor than an accountability partner. But I think it's real important that you have a relationship with someone who has a little more life under the belt that can, pour some wisdom into you especially about decisions that you're making right now.
Yeah, I think that's super important, and I think the word mentor and mentee obviously go hand in hand, and I know so many people that are a few years older than me that have spoken about both a mentor and a mentee role, and they touch on the fact that when they were younger, they had somebody that, to your point, had more years under their belt, had experienced more things, whether that's professionally, personally, whatever it may be. And the other perspective is when they get to that certain point in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, there are those people that are younger than them that typically they can help out as well. So I'm glad you touched on that, because I think although mentors and mentees and accountability partners are often similar, I think they do have different roles. And I think it's really interesting how you touched on that. And you said the term forward focus, and I think that's really neat that you touched on that, because that's the importance of, by my definition, focusing on what's going forward, focusing on what's ahead of you. It doesn't mean that you forget the past and don't worry about it, whether that's mistakes, successes, things you've done really well you want to repeat, or things you don't want to repeat. But the reality is you have more time ahead of you to work on those things in front of you than you do things behind you. So I'm really glad that you touched on that.
Yeah. And, you don't want to get stuck in your mistakes, right? I mean, I was on a radio show this morning. We were talking about how most people, or many people, let failure define them, and what I was like, don't be defined by failure, and I always talk about God sees your future, not your failure. Use the failure to be a catalyst for success in the future. I always want to take, it's something we've learned from some of my friends that are Navy SEALs, who talk about using every adversity for an advantage. I mean, when they said that, I'm like, man, that resonates with me, because, there are mistakes we're going to make. There are challenges that we're going to face. There's adversity going to happen naturally in our life. And we can point to a million of those right now. But the question is, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to let that challenge defeat you, or are you going to use it as a catalyst for some future success? So I'm with you, man. It's all about moving forward and making forward progress.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's so important that you touched on that aspect of SEALs and those other organizations that, when we in the sports world, you are there for your teammate and you're there for your coach. But it's a little bit different than in the military perspective, when you're there for them, but their life and your life and other people's lives are on the line. Not that sports and business are not important, but when those organizations are doing it, and that's how they're doing it, and they live their day to day, I think there's a lot of overlap that we could probably mimic and follow in our traditional life. So I'm glad you touched on that. So if I could grant you dinner with anybody, dead or alive, who would you pick?
Anybody dead or okay? So I'm going to say Lance Armstrong.
Ooh.
Okay. So, and I'm getting a lot of flack for this, I got to tell you, right? Because everyone says, oh, a fall from grace, greatest. But I'm telling you, I am mesmerized by this guy. He's obviously on the 30 for 30 documentary. And I love to get inside. I would love to have an hour or a couple hours to just pick his brain, to understand how he thinks. What are the difference makers for him that helped him be the greatest cyclist who's ever lived? It just would be a fascinating conversation.
You went on a limb saying that. I'm super, super glad that you did, because I think he's extremely controversial in many ways. And Greg LeMond and some other people don't even acknowledge the fact that he was a cyclist. And there are people that say he's the best ever. So I think that would be a fascinating, fascinating dinner. So if we could go back to the 20-year-old version of yourself, and you could give yourself only one piece of advice, what would that be?
I would say don't take yourself so seriously. And that sound trite, but for me, I've always been driven to be my best. I've always been driven to succeed. I've always been driven to make a difference. But along the way, you really need to be able to just not take yourself so seriously. Give yourself a little more break, give yourself some more grace so that you can enjoy life more. I think enjoying life is something that a lot of times in the pursuit of an extraordinary result or success, you can really miss out on enjoying the things that are right in front of you, enjoying the most important relationships that you have, and also enjoying the process along the way, the bumps in the road as well.
No, I think that's great advice. So if you're okay with, we're going to switch lanes into what we call the hot seat questions. And the only request we have for you is that you spit out the first thing that comes to mind.
Oh boy, this could be trouble.
All right. You have one last meal and you can absolutely choose anything. What do you pick?
Cheeseburgers and fries, man. Let's go.
Favorite smell?
Vanilla.
Favorite sport?
Basketball.
Yes. All-time favorite team?
New York Yankees.
All-time favorite movie?
Cinderella Man.
Ooh, great boxing movie. Do you have a favorite quote?
Well, can I give you a Bible verse?
You can give me whatever. You're on whatever comes to mind, brother.
Here you go. Whom the Son sets free is free indeed.
Awesome. Do you have an all-time favorite book? And it can't be yours. That's just one.
Shoot. Darn it. I would say, okay, I'll give you two. Sorry. One is the Bible, obviously, because it's life-changing. But the second one is The Power of Full Engagement.
Ooh, who's that by?
Oh, I think his last name's Schwartz. Really good. The Power of Full Engagement.
I love that. I've not heard that. And then, favorite singer, group, or band?
Led Zeppelin. Come on. With a name like Jimmy Page, you gotta go with Led Zeppelin.
And if you were stuck in a foxhole and you could only have one person to have your back, who would you pick?
My brother John.
All right. What's the best way for our listeners to connect with you and follow you?
Easiest way is to go to my website at jimmypage.us or to follow me on Instagram and Twitter, which is at jimmypage37.
That's how old Jimmy is. He's 37 years old.
And then
last question we have for you is the same question we ask everybody, is if you have some parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners today.
I would just say to, live your life with as much purpose and passion as you can. And don't get derailed by the people that are naysayers or critics. Instead, continue to press on and fulfill your greatest and highest potential and purpose.
I love it. I think it's perfect advice to end today's podcast. So I truly, truly appreciate you, and I know that you and I will connect again soon.
You bet. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you for listening to episode number 270. Jimmy shared a really neat story about his son and how he was able to become a positive force for his lacrosse team through his no-quit attitude and positive spirit. When it comes to discussing morning routines, Jimmy was very adamant on the impact winning your morning has on the potential to win the rest of your day, something that I absolutely agree with 100%. Jimmy mentioned using failure to be a catalyst for your future as opposed to dwelling on it. So my challenge to you is just that. Don't look at and dwell upon your past failures and continue to play them over and over again in your mind. Instead, acknowledge them, but use them as a positive building block for your successful future. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.